Welcome. This is the quest for King Arthur. I'm the King Arthur guy, and this is episode 4. This episode I'm going to look at two 5th century figures, Hengest and Vortigern. There's certain things about them that I want to talk about before I actually get into the history of 5th century Britain, the course of events. So I will get to Arthur, just in due time. So we'll start with Hengest. Now, you remember that I said that Vortigern hired Anglo-Saxon mercenaries. According to the information we have, these mercenaries were commanded by the brothers Hengest and Horsa, with Hengest being the more important of the two. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien, yes, the same guy who wrote The Lord of the Rings, came up with a rather interesting theory about Hengest in his book, Finn and Hengest, the Fragment and the Episode. Now, this is a reference to something called the fight at Finnsburg, and it involves a man by the name of Hengest, and Tolkien argued that it is the same Hengest who came to Britain commanding the mercenaries. We don't need to go into all of the arguments he used to support that contention. I'll just stick to one of them, which is that the name Hengest is extremely rare, and these are the only two known examples. And if these were different men, then they would have lived in exactly the same generation, which is a little bit far-fetched. So it's more likely that it's the same men. Now, the title of the fragment and the episode refers to the information that we have on the fight at Finnsburg. The fragment is an incomplete epic poem. Part of it is missing because the manuscript decayed. And the episode is a synopsis of the event that is contained within the epic poem Beowulf. Okay, now, according to the story, Hengest was the commander of the bodyguard of a Danish king named Hneif, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly, but we won't worry about that. Hneif's sister had married Finn, who was a Frisian king, and there was a great deal of animosity between the Danes and the Frisians, but this dynastic marriage was an attempt to try and smooth things over. So Hneif decided that he wanted to spend the winter with visiting his sister, and that would include Christmas time. That was his main reason for visiting her, but he's going to spend the whole winter there because we are talking about northern Europe in the wintertime, so it would be very difficult for them to sail home again and travel through winter. Now, some sort of a fight broke out between Hneif's men and Finn's men. We don't know the cause of this fight. A number of Finn's men were killed, but Hneif himself was also killed. Hengest then made the very controversial decision that he would take service with Finn and bring much of Hneif's old bodyguard with him. Now, he was criticized for this because of their concept of honor. He should have wanted to avenge his lord's death, but actually he was planning to avenge his lord's death. This was all part of a cunning plan. Now, when spring came, a number of the Danes said that they wanted to leave Finn's service and return home. This was a trick. In reality, they went back and got reinforcements. Now, we don't have the details of exactly how this happened, but somehow Hengest was able to maneuver Finn and his bodyguard into an ambush, and they were all killed. Now, according to the history of the Britons, Hengest was not just the commander of the mercenaries, he was also a criminal who had fled to Britain to escape retribution. This is often dismissed as just anti-Hengest propaganda. However, if Professor Tolkien is correct, then it would have been true. I mean, he would have been fleeing retribution for having engineered the massacre that led to Finn's death, and Finn's relatives would have wanted revenge. Anyway, I'm going to talk more about Hengest in the next episode, and I want to go over to Vortigern, starting with his name. Vortigern means superior king or over king, and it's often said that it is a title, not a name. However, there are those who say no, it's a name. Now, the only real evidence we have that it's a title is that it doesn't look like a name in English, but they didn't speak English. Actually, there are a number of well-known Celtic leaders, not just among the Britons, but among Celts in general, who had names that looked like titles in English. Vercingetorix, for example, was Julius Caesar's enemy back in Gaul. It means over warrior king, which is almost the same meaning as Vortigern, but it was definitely his name. It's stamped on coins. We know that the Breton royal house sometimes used the name of Riothamus, which means most royal. So the idea that Vortigern or Supreme King looks like a title is not enough to prove that it is a title. Now, I would argue that it's a name because of the way in which they treated names. If you look at the primary sources, mainly Gildas's book, The Ruin and Conquest of Britain, the History of the Britons, and the Welsh Annals, and you look at the way they referred to kings, they always referred to them by name, not by title. If someone was referred to only by title, then that person was not the subject. Gildas gives us two examples. There's a section of his book when he criticized 5 kings who were alive at the time he wrote the book. It's called the section of the 5 tyrants. One of them was Vortapor, who was ruler of Dyfed, whom Gildas referred to as the bad son of a good king. Vortapor is the subject, right? The good king, his father, Agricola, is not the subject, right? Now, you see the same thing when he's criticized Melgwyn of Gwynedd. He said that Melgwyn seized power by killing the king, his uncle, in a civil war. Once again, Melgwyn is the subject. So if Vortigern was a title, they would have to have referred to him by that title and not his name, so that eventually they forgot what the name was over time. But they did not do that. There's more evidence to support the idea that it was a name, but I think that's sufficient. Now we move on to the tricky question of, was Vortigern a tyrant? Gildas did not even refer to him as Vortigern, he just called him the proud tyrant. And the British history also depicts him as a tyrant. Okay, so as I pointed out in episode 2, I think Gildas was a Roman bigot. In those days, the word tyrant, Gildas's day, the word tyrant had more than one meaning. It meant what we mean, but it also meant usurper, someone who seizes power illegally. I don't think Gildas was using it to mean cruel and oppressive ruler. I think he was using it to mean usurper. After all, Vortigern was a native Briton. Gildas would only have accepted Roman political authority as legitimate. Okay. And he never actually accused Vortigern of any crimes. He just called him a tyrant. Now, there's also a piece of evidence in which Gildas said that his hero, Ambrosius Aurelianus, both of his parents were born to the purple, a technical term that meant they were both children of emperors. Now, there was a period of instability after Britain became independent of the Roman Empire, when they had several rulers in a row who didn't last very long. Modern historians sometimes refer to them as the mini-emperors, and they think that that's what Gildas was referring to. I don't think it is. I think he just meant exactly what he said, that both of Ambrosius's parents were children of Roman emperors. It was a way of pushing Ambrosius's legitimacy. But it's also impossible. It's a lie. It's propaganda. So I admit this is my interpretation, but I think that Gildas was indulging in an argument over which of the two had the more legitimate claim. Now, if we turn to the British history, that was written in the year 830, and as I said, attributed to a man by the name of Nennius, although there's some disagreement as to whether Nennius actually wrote it, but I'm not going to get into that debate. I'll just say it's Nennius. Now, in that time period, Wales was embroiled in a feud between northern Welsh kingdoms and southern Welsh kingdoms. Vortigern's descendants ruled Powys in the north. Nennius lived in the south. You can't trust a southern Welsh source when it comes to the founder of a northern Welsh dynasty. And although Nennius attacked Vortigern as a tyrant, there are problems with this. And I should point out, I'm not the first person to defend Vortigern, by the way. So some of the arguments that I'm making here are not my arguments. They're arguments that have already been fielded by other people. Anyway, Vortigern is mainly attacked in 3 legends, which raises the question as to why there are legends in this book in the first place, given that Nennius specifically stated that he copied out information from earlier written sources. He did not use oral traditions. Then where did he get these legends from? They must already have been in written form before 830. That's very early. The medieval Welsh did not make a concerted effort to write out their oral traditions until about 200 years later. Now, in the first of these legends, the main figure is Saint Germanus, who was from Gaul and who visited Britain twice. According to the story, Germanus was appalled to discover that Vortigern had married his own daughter. This is the only crime Vortigern is ever actually accused of: incest. Now, first of all, most people, myself included, do not believe that he actually committed this crime, and I will explain why in a moment. But secondly, let us say for the sake of argument that he did. That would have made him a pervert, not a tyrant. It's a personal kind of evil, not a political kind. That is a distinction. Well, anyway, Vortigern and his unnamed daughter are supposed to have had a son named Faustus. When Germanus pointed out how sinful they were, Faustus then rejected his father and became a disciple of Germanus, which, just stinks of religious propaganda, really. But anyway, there's very good reason to believe that this never happened. It's all made up. First of all, Nennius himself contradicts himself. He said that Vortigern had 3 sons: Vortimer, Cetegrin, and Passant. And the 4th son was Faustus. He began the paragraph by saying that he had 3 sons, but then remembered that he told this story and so had to chew in the 4th son. So he was copying out reliable information and then had to change it. Furthermore, if we go back to Vortapor, whom Gildas criticized, who was alive in Gildas's day, Gildas criticized him for raping his own daughter. And Vortapor ruled Dyfed in southern Wales. So here we are presented with 2 Brythonic kings of the 5th and early 6th centuries, one named Vortigern, the other named Vortapor, and they're both accused of incest. That's a little coincidental, especially since Vortapor was southern Welsh. It's quite possible that someone, perhaps Nennius himself, was influenced by Vortapor's crime and decided to level that crime against Vortigern, being inspired by the similarity of the names. Now, there's other evidence, but we don't need to go into that. Anyway, so we return to our legend, and St. Germanus finally became fed up with Vortigern's sinfulness and fasted for 3 days and 3 nights, praying to God, who then sent miraculous fire from heaven, burning down Vortigern's castle and killing him. Okay. The problem with this is that it happens again. The very same book records St. Germanus then visiting Bentley, the king of Powys, but Bentley won't even see him, and Germanus takes shelter in the hut of a poor but honest man named Cadael, and then during the night God sends miraculous fire from heaven burning down Bentley's castle and killing him. Germanus then raises Cadael up to being king of Powys, something he did not have the authority to do, by the way. Okay, there are several problems with this, one of which is that Bentley just happens to be the name of a pagan sun god from the old polytheistic religion. Another problem is that, if you will remember, I said that Britain had a central government, but it also had nobles who ruled different states within the realm, and that these nobles, the ruler of the central government was probably elected in some way. So the ruler of the central government was also a noble and also ruled one of these states. Vortigern's state was Powys. He was the king of Powys, not Bentley. So when Ambrosius staged his coup and killed Vortigern, Ambrosius took over the position as ruler of the central government, but apparently Powys went to someone named Cadale. So both of these illegal takeovers had to be justified, but apparently Ambrosius's faction was not very good with propaganda, so they just used the same story twice. Someone, possibly Nennius himself, realized that it was the same story twice and put in Bentley and edited out Vortigern. It should also be pointed out that in the 9th century, the rulers of Powys erected a monument boasting of their illustrious ancestors. I already mentioned this in episode 3, I think it was. And Vortigern's name's on the monument, and it said that he was, it was episode 2, that's right, that he had married Servia, daughter of Magnus Maximus. But it also says that he was blessed by St. Germanus, the very same St. Germanus who's depicted as his enemy in these legends. So I believe that the reference to St. Germanus was added to the monument precisely to counter the propaganda in the British history. Now, if we stick just to the facts, although it's quite probable that this well-known saint met the king, there's no evidence that it actually happened. It's possible Germanus never met Vortigern, let alone had any confrontation with him or blessed him. Both versions might be propaganda. Anyway, we move to the last of these legends, which is about Ambrosius Aurelianus. So Vortigern is trying to... wait a minute, before I say that, I should point out that many people point to this legend as proof that Ambrosius was popular, that he was popular with the people because he passed it a legend. I don't think so. First of all, as I've already said, this is a piece of propaganda written as a legend. And secondly, I believe this legend was included because it's anti-Vortigern, not because it's pro-Ambrosius. If we ignore the legend, then Ambrosius is mentioned in the British history in a grand total of 1 sentence, which is not even about him. Anyway, according to the story, Vortigern was trying to build a castle, but every time he tried to build it, it collapsed. His wise men told him that he had to find a boy who had no earthly father. Then the boy should be sacrificed, and then the construction could go ahead. So he sent his agents scouring the land until they found a boy whose mother swore she had never slept with a man. A mystical being had visited her in a dream, and that's how she became pregnant. Now, people who are familiar with the Arthurian legends might say, hold on a second, this sounds like Merlin's origin story. That's because in the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth took this story, edited it, including taking out Ambrosius, and turned it into Merlin's story. But it was originally Ambrosius's story. Anyway, so they take this boy to Vortigern, and they're going to sacrifice him. But he makes a deal with Vortigern, saying that if he can explain the real reason why Vortigern cannot build the castle, then he will be released. Okay, so he tells them to dig down, and they will find an underground lake. Drain the lake, they will find a box. Then open the box. Okay, they do everything that he says. Then the box is opened, and there are 2 dragons inside. It's a very large box, obviously. A white dragon and a red dragon. And the 2 fight each other back and forth until finally the red dragon chases away the white one. Ambrosius then says that the white dragon represents the Anglo-Saxons, the red one represents the Britons, and by the way, that's still the symbol of the Welsh to this day, the red dragon. That's where that symbol comes from. Anyway, so the red dragon represents the Britons, and a great hero, by which he means himself, Ambrosius, will drive out the Anglo-Saxons, saving the people. He then states that his father was a Roman consul, which fits with what I said about Gildas's faction, Ambrosius's faction being Roman bigots, because that's a blatantly pro-Roman thing to say, and it's also a lie. And it also contradicts the idea that his father was a mystical being. Well, I think I can explain this contradiction. First of all, his mother said that she never slept with a man. If we take that at face value and take it literally, then that means it was a virgin birth, right? Just like the Virgin Mary. They are depicting Ambrosius as a savior who will save the Britons from the Anglo-Saxons. So this is messianic propaganda. It's also tapping into a common type of propaganda in the ancient world among polytheistic peoples. Their great leaders or heroes would often claim to be the sons of gods. The most famous example is that Alexander the Great claimed to be the son of Zeus. Now, obviously, by the 5th century, most of the population of Britain, not all, but most, were Christian, so they couldn't pick a pagan god. So they went with the more vague mystical being. Now, you have to understand how bigotry worked among the ancient Romans. They did not have the concept of mixed race. So according to Roman bigots, you automatically belong to a particular race. And this race was determined by the father. So if a Roman woman had a child with a non-Roman man, that child was not Roman. It belonged to whatever race the father belonged to. But if a Roman man had a child with a non-Roman woman, then the child was Roman. Okay? So since that's how they saw race, and they were bigots, then it was vitally important that Ambrosius's father had to be Roman, which means the propagandist had painted himself into a corner. He was using this messianic propaganda, but that didn't match up with the racism. So he had to contradict himself. There was no other way out of it. Okay. So if you ignore the rhetoric and stick to the facts, Vortigern actually comes off looking pretty good. I'm going to get into this more in the next episode. But he did hire the Anglo-Saxon mercenaries, and they did rebel, which was a major mistake. But it was a mistake, not a deliberate act of evil. I'm also going to show you in the next episode that even that mistake is understandable. It was more a matter of miscalculation than anything else. He couldn't even be really accused of incompetence. Okay, now that's it for this episode. So if you've gotten this far, thank you for sticking through, and I hope you found it interesting. I hope if you haven't subscribed, I hope you will, and hit like, and maybe make a comment. And I invite you back for next episode. And until then, be seeing you.